Thank you, Sarah. And sorry for the delay, everyone. It looks like we're all set now and we're broadcasting live. So thanks for everybody for coming out. I see a lot of familiar faces. So also thanks for that commitment you've had to climate change and our climate action plan. As you know or may not know, this is the second community meeting that we've had. The first one was back in May, early May. And we took input and ideas from people. And with the consultant team of VHB, Resilient Planning and Design, and the Rockingham Planning Commission, we've worked to put together some strategies that were received the first meeting and were put together from other sources. There's climate ambassadors and other work going on throughout the town to reach out to people and get more information and input. We'll go through those tonight and try to get a refined list of those strategies that we can then include in the climate action plan. As we all see, and I don't know, every week or every 2 weeks, it seems like there's a new climate catastrophe or climate emergency. The flooding up in Ludlow, Vermont, and Montpelier, Vermont was worse than Hurricane Irene, they said, and there wasn't really any warning for that. So we're dealing with that. I don't remember seeing smoke from Canadian wildfires before, but that seems to be a big issue affecting cities on the East Coast. That's a new issue. So these emerging issues, these new issues seem to be happening faster, which is all, somewhat within predicted elevated climate emergency and climate issues. So there's no better time than to have the urgency we need for the climate action plan and to complete the climate action plan to help the community both respond to these climate emergencies, but also to prepare and protect the community for the long run and be resilient as a community. The more you can do to spread the word to people in the community to get their input so they feel a part of this, the better. We appreciate all the efforts people have taken to spread the word beyond just these community meetings. But as I said, we want to make Portsmouth as resilient a place as possible, and I think that's how we have to do it, is to get the word out, get support in the community. And then, as I said at the last meeting, getting that support from the community is going to strengthen the ask to the City Council when there's strategies that we want to implement and we need funds to do that. We'll have support from the community to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Donnie now, and he's going to go through a quick polling, and then we're going to talk some more about strategies as we go forward.
Great. Thanks, Peter. And speaking of the climate emergency, I'm glad we got a little bit of a break from the heat. I know everybody is talking about how hot it's been, and 80s is pretty hot for me, but it represents a little bit of a break in that heat wave. Poll Everywhere is a software that we're using for real-time polling. We're going to be asking some demographic questions tonight just to see who's in the room and who's been participating in our process. You can be present here in the room, or you could be present on the Zoom platform, and you could equally participate in the survey. So the notes are up here, pollev.com, and then you enter VHB Planning 007. And then just wait for the activity to come up. Or you can just join by text if you don't have a smartphone. Just text VHB Planning 007 to 22333, and then just wait for the prompts. But before we get started on that, the agenda for today, real-time polling is going to take about 5 to 10 minutes. We'll give an update on the planning process and engagement. That's going to be Steve. Presentation of the 2021 greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and that's going to be a preliminary. Yes?
I'm sorry, I wasn't successful in setting up.
Oh, that's okay. There will be another opportunity. The instructions will be back up and running. Okay. Oh, my apologies for those folks on the Zoom. There we go. Presentation of the 2021 greenhouse gas emissions inventories, and then, as Peter mentioned, presentation of the draft mitigation strategies. Steve will spearhead the group brainstorming activity. That'll be followed by some group report backs where we'll share ideas amongst the groups, and then we'll talk about next steps in the planning process, and then we'll provide our thank yous and workshop closing. So again, the Poll Everywhere software is, the instructions are up here. 007 and text 223333. And Kate or Steve, if anybody has any problems, if you wouldn't mind floating around. Oh. Yep, sorry about that. There you go.
So the number for VHB planning 007 is 22333.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is the recipient. Yeah, you should get something similar to this, waiting for VHB Planning's 007 presentation to begin if you're successful in logging on to polev.com. Great. And again, the purpose of the demographic questions is to see who's in the room, who's listening online and participating online. And then if we need to make adjustments, Steve is going to go over how we've been reaching out to the community more broadly through the community ambassadors and various other mechanisms. If we need to make adjustments and to see who we're not reaching, what demographics we're not reaching, then we can go back and do so for continuous improvement purposes. All right. Looks like some people are still looking at the instructions. Are we okay? Okay.
So I didn't get that image.
Oh, you did not? Okay.
I texted 22333.
Well, if you're texting, you're not going to get the same image. So you're going to be in that text box, the text message.
But you should get a response from all everywhere.
Yep.
SMS text message?
Yes. Nope.
Okay.
Okay.
Or all it works, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. All right, the first poll, I am a, select all that apply. We want to know if you're a homeowner, a property owner, renter, student, employee working in Portsmouth, business owner. If you're none of the above, that's fine too. So we're starting to see the results come in.
I'm looking for the thing that will send my answers. What do I do?
I'm not going to.
Just tap it. Yeah, mine's not working.
I know because
Okay.
I know this is a
22333. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'm sorry if folks are having difficulty connecting. Okay. Well, we'll move on to the next poll. What is your race, ethnicity? A for white, black or African American. B, American Indian or Native American. C, Asian or Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. D, Hispanic or Latino. E, and then if you prefer not to say, that's perfectly acceptable as well. Okay, we'll close it in a couple seconds. Okay, what is your age? Less than 18, 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, greater than 65.
Why is it all old folks are here?
Not exclusive.
You've got some diversity. Okay, so this is the last question that we're going to ask of you as part of this program. We're ending on a high note. All right. Well, thank you very much for participating in that poll. Sorry if some of you had some difficulties. I think we got some good takeaways nevertheless, and some work to do to maybe work on the diversity of folks that are participating in the planning process. So, Steve, speaking of, why don't you come up and talk about the planning process and engagement?
All right. Hello, everybody. I know we have some familiar faces from the last couple of meetings, but we also have some new faces. So what we wanted to do is just give you an overview of what's been happening over the last couple of months as far as outreach and engagement. So the primary things we want to focus on in this update are the meeting number 1 on May 4th that Peter mentioned, the work of the climate ambassadors, some of which are here tonight, in the coordination with them as volunteers getting the word out. And then some other things we've done along the way, including feedback forms, tabling at events, and some online surveying. Meeting number 1, we had about 75 people between in-person and online. It was wonderful. I'm sure we're guessing some of those people feel like they came and they said what they wanted to say, and now we know and we can continue to work on it. So we figured we'd have a smaller group tonight, but we're really glad that you're here. And so beyond meeting number 1, let's see, what we wanted to do is just tell you what we heard from folks at that event without inundating you completely. At meeting number 1, we heard ways the city and community, community being mainly residential, commercial, and institutional bodies, should focus on their efforts on reducing and preventing greenhouse gas emissions. So we had people, as you might recall, brainstorming and writing things down, and we continued to collect those from folks that were online as well. So this included working across municipal and community sectors. We heard ideas for a comprehensive approach that addresses energy sourcing and consumption, building efficiency and construction, broader and more sustainable transportation solutions, and many others. Most importantly, people were sharing with us that there's a need to focus on everything at once. So do it all simultaneously, right? That sounds about right, which is great. It makes this job harder. Some of the barriers that were identified by folks that were in attendance included the affordability of some of the solutions, availability and understandability of information needed to implement these actions, and the challenge of doing things differently for a lot of people. People don't like taxes, being told what to do. People have misconceptions in some cases about what some of the solutions are or how they play out. We asked some questions about how aggressive should the city be in implementation of a climate action plan. The focus of responses was on the city, which should serve as an example and be as aggressive as possible. That was a resounding statement. While being cognizant of the impact on the cost of living here. So be as aggressive as possible, but be aware that we're not trying to price people out or push people out in the process. We're trying to pull people into being part of solutions. More education and encouragement may be needed for community members in their pursuit of reductions. We talked about how climate hazards have been experienced by folks. Peter touched on things that have happened even just since that meeting, which is a little horrifying. But we heard rise in energy costs, a range of health impacts, extreme weather and coastal flooding events, loss of habitat. How should the city prioritize its climate action investments? So that's part of what you'll be helping us with tonight. Prioritize climate investments will be challenging. That's what the group decided, and I think that's true. Prioritize efforts that are free or low-hanging fruit, or where money's available. I'm guessing where non-city money is available, it would be highest priority. The biggest takeaways in a lot of this was to look for actions that have co-benefits, look for actions that will satisfy multiple needs here within the city. And so there was an emphasis, and it came out from a lot of the groups, think about co-benefits, identify co-benefits, that there's a better approach when we're doing more good for more reasons. Population groups that people were worried about included the unhoused, the workforce here within the city, especially commuters, renters, the elderly, children. There was a recognition of NIMBYism, and there was a recognition of one of the populations people were worried about being the natural resource communities. And then how can the city promote education and awareness? There were both discussions of using a carrot through a tax incentive and using a stick through penalties or paying a fee. Ongoing outreach and education engagement, again, with residents and others. Having events, engagement activities, things that you have been doing largely, and making it something people want. So beyond that, the work that we did May 4th, we have been working with a lot of you before May 4th and since at a May 16th event as well on Zoom to try to brainstorm who we could be getting the message out to, what other events will be happening, and try to provide your voices through your networks out to the city. And so the work of the Climate Ambassadors is something that we haven't seen done a lot here in New Hampshire, and some of you took that work and you've done a lot with it. Some of you have found just one group that you could reach out to that we never would have gotten to, and that's been really helpful. So we want to continue to use this to best to our ability to broaden the engagement discussion. So even after tonight, if there are groups that you want to talk to about the strategies that are emerging, that would be very helpful for us. And then some of the other engagement that you may have witnessed here has been kind of happening in parallel. So since when we first got involved here, Donnie and I, it's the staff and some of you have been out through the Sustainability Fair, Market Square Day, and many other events that have been happening over the last couple months. What's been interesting is that participants are well aware of the impacts. They're well aware of the need for action. I haven't experienced or seen in the comments that much pushback, like you don't need to worry about this. It's been, here are the range of things you need to worry about, and here are the range of actions you need to focus on. And some of the things that folks would like to see include community power, which you already have underway. They would like to see increasing energy efficiency of existing buildings, land use policies that preserve nature, promote open space and walkability and bikeability, reducing waste and composting food waste, the potential to improve community well-being and equity through actions that have co-benefits, applying science-based targets. Many of the other ideas that have come out through these avenues included taking a balanced yet comprehensive approach to maximizing greenhouse gas reductions, naming specific sectors, in some cases transportation or land use. Comments related to it being too easy and cheap to drive and park downtown and other places, like that our behavior doesn't change when there's no barrier there to affordability for many. And then needing a systems approach to transportation planning, land use planning, not existing in silos. Portsmouth has great policy and plans, complete streets, bike and walk friendly community, the master plan, bike and pedestrian plans, but progress is slow and we need to stay on it. So that's part of what we've heard. Need a plan for EV chargers, need plans to put some of these other actions that we'll be talking about into the works, whether they're regulatory or other. So that's kind of an overview of where we've been so far. Any additions from anyone else that's been working on this? Peter, Kate, Donnie? All right, back to Donnie.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve. So some of this material was presented during the first community workshop, but we're presenting some updates to the greenhouse gas emissions inventories as folks that have volunteered for the city have updated the 2021 inventory. But historically, their 2006, 2012, and 2018 inventories were completed. The results of those were presented during the first community workshop, and we're here today to present preliminary results of the 2021 inventories as well. I say preliminary because there's still some QA, QC process that needs to happen to those inventories, but we wanted to give you an update on where those are at currently. Why conduct a greenhouse gas emissions inventory? I will say that a lot of folks in this room already know this. A lot of Portsmouth is a very educated community, but for the sake of everybody else in the room, to identify current sources of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions that are generated in Portsmouth, either by the municipality or via community activities, to quantify those emissions so that you can then compare greenhouse gas emissions over time to measure progress to meet reduction targets. But if you don't quantify, then you don't know what's being generated, and you don't know what's being generated by what and where. So that's why we conduct a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. We have reported on local government operations and community-based inventories as well. Greenhouse gas emissions inventories are typically broken out by scope, just to set a level playing field. The definitions differ, slightly between the different inventory types, but for scope 1, we're talking about direct greenhouse gas emissions that are generated through the combustion of fossil fuels that are on-site, owned and operated by the reporting entity. And that includes fleet vehicles as well, so stationary sources and municipal and fleet sources as well, or mobile sources. Scope 2 in both cases is just the purchased electricity. If there's a district system, that's also counted here as well, but that's not the case in Portsmouth. So we're just looking at what the purchased electricity is from the utility or other power generators. Scope 3 is all indirect emissions, anything that's happening as a consequence of the activities of the reporting entity, but not directly tied to the reporting entity. So, for example, the city employee travel, commuting to and from the office, business travel, waste that's generated but then processed off-site. For the community, we're talking about sometimes there's the treatment of the city's solid waste, again, as solid waste as another example. You're generating it within the community, but it's being processed, and the emissions are actually being, created or generated elsewhere outside of the city's boundaries. So Scope 1 is direct, Scope 2 is indirect, but related to purchased electricity, and Scope 3 is all other indirect emission sources. So for the preliminary 2021 results, looking at the municipality itself, you can see by looking at the pie chart to the left-hand side of the screen, mobile sources are a large contributor to the municipality's emissions, and in large part that's related to the DPW's fleet, but it's also related to the schools, right? So you have a lot of school buses that's contracted out, but they're falling under, at least in the scope of this particular inventory, they're falling under the city's scope 1 emissions. Which is why Scope 1 and the school department contributes a majority of the emissions under the city's Scope 1 category. Secondarily, 16.8% is purchased electricity. 8.6% is all of the stationary sources, so the buildings, the boilers within the systems, all of the other building systems. 4.4% is fuel and energy-related activities. That's all stemming from like T&D losses and things of that nature, and also natural gas usage. It's a mix there. But in terms of those scopes I previously mentioned, 78.8% of what's been measured for the city is falling under what is Scope 1, what is under their control. So there's a lot of leverage to move the needle and reduce emissions. If we're looking at reductions and our ability to impact reductions. Scope 2 is 16.8% electricity purchases. So if you can supplement that or supplant that with renewable sources of energy, that 16.8% goes down and potentially disappears if you're sourcing 100% renewable energy through various potential means. Transmission and distribution losses, that's going to happen, but if it's natural gas, it's coming through the pipelines, it's coming through the distribution network. If it's the electricity, it's happening through the transmission lines and things of that nature. So if you're transitioning and resourcing your energy supply, then those emissions can go away as well. From a community standpoint, the biggest generator was transportation, 52.7%. Now, that's about 150 million vehicle miles that were documented as part of this. The Rockingham Planning Commission assisted in the development of the miles that were accounted for in this inventory. So that 52.7%, if you can offset and reduce the vehicle miles traveled by, one, promoting active transportation, two, by getting folks to take more public transportation, or three, you may want to reduce commuting miles, by, promoting at-home work. And another opportunity, as we talked about, Steve mentioned earlier, relating to the land use, and this is one of our, and maybe touches upon a couple of our strategies, is really putting more amenities closer to where people live and increasing the density of where people live so that they don't have to travel far to get to what they need, the basic services, the assets, and the resources that Portsmouth has to offer. In a scope breakdown, 13.7% is related to, falls under the scope 1, and that's relating to fuel consumption. So that's not a lot of leverage in terms of overall, the scopes and the breakdown of the scope. So 13.7%, if you transition folks from natural gas, from propane, from fuel oil, those that are still on those buildings and residences and commercials and entities and industrial buildings, if you're still on those sources of energy, transitioning that will get you about 13.7% if the transition is complete. Scope 2 is 22.6%, and again, if you can move the community toward renewable sources, we have the community power, there's a renewable energy option under the community power. If you promote solar, on-site solar development, if you look at community solar, if you, tie people into those types of systems, then you could start to see that 22.6 get chipped away. And by the way, the state and the utilities, of course, have a role in this as well. And again, that scope 3 is 63.7%, and the majority of that is comprised of those transportation emissions. Solid waste is also a not so insignificant component of that. So recycling, diversion, other diversion methods like composting. I know commercial composting facilities is not allowed in the state, so there's alternatives. But moving away from the traditional idea of generating waste and that waste getting to a landfill, you can make some strides there. So presentation of the draft mitigation strategies. So we pulled together a list of about 80 or so strategies. We want to filter that down to what's going to be most important to the community and the municipality moving forward. As was previously mentioned, we want to, again, refine this to a list that's going to be manageable for the city and for the community to take on. There's going to be a lot of competing priorities. The municipality still has to provide the basic services. They still have to provide and take care of their own operations. There's going to be competition for resources. And the community is going to be focused in a variety of different ways. So how do we get their attention? How do we make the best of their participation in the implementation of this overall plan? So just to underline the fact that this effort culminated as a result of the previous community engagement efforts. So a lot of what you heard Steve say is reflected here in this list of strategies, and we'll be passing around a worksheet during the group breakout sessions that have all of these strategies, but I'm just going to highlight on a few of them, those that were identified as either high impact or medium high impact, just to give you a taste of what we're looking at and what we're considering. But again, it culminated through all of the community engagement events. We looked at all of the comments. We looked at what we got back from the workshop. We tied this in here. We also did a crosswalk analysis. So you do have a lot of plans, like a lot of great plans, and a lot of them do relate to climate action, regardless of whether or not the actual planning effort was climate focused. The master plan, the bike ped plan that's some years old, I think 2014, if I'm not mistaken. We looked at all of those different plans. We even looked at regional plans to see what others were doing within the region and how we can piggyback on that. We also pulled from industry resources, C40, and the like. And we also supplemented through our own engagement, so reviewing, zoning to see what the impediments or barriers would be to solar development and getting folks to, install solar around their own homes, to install EV charging stations, things of that nature. So a variety of different inputs led to this list of about 80. And again, we want to refine that, get your feedback, get your understanding of the priorities. But here, and each of these different slides are focused on the different sectors, and again, the high or medium-high impact actions that we looked at. So for the built environment, we looked at, conducting energy audits of all municipal buildings and implementing the energy efficiency measures that come out of it. We can run a long list of what those potential energy efficiency measures could be, and that would overpopulate the climate action plan, quite honestly. So what we do is we just say, if you haven't conducted energy audits, the first thing that you need to do is understand what the opportunities are within the buildings. And those energy audits, whether they're level 1, which is a basic energy audit, understanding, where's the fuel coming from, what is the typical operations of the building, what is the energy consumption, what is the energy use intensity, which is energy consumed on a per square foot basis, or level 2, which dives even deeper into the building assessment to come up with robust energy efficiency measures and assessing them from an energy savings standpoint and a cost saving standpoint as well. These audits can really give you a roadmap on what to do and how to do it and what the cost benefit of those efficiency measures would be. So conducting those energy audits is a priority. And then ensuring, and that takes care of some existing conditions. New construction, just making sure that they're all net zero ready, right? So come up with performance verification and reporting and adopting a requirement that all of the buildings meet USGBC's LEED, and that's the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. We talked about this building being LEED. They have a new program called LEED Zero, LEED Zero Energy, making sure that buildings are giving back into the grid as much as they're taking from the grid. And then thirdly, eliminating building systems that utilize fossil fuel sources. So that first action for the energy audits is going to tell you where the savings are, but to get to net zero, you really need to replace anything that's fossil fuel consuming with an electrified alternative. For energy, entering into a power purchase agreements to purchase energy from renewable sources for all municipal electric accounts. So whatever the case may be, there's a variety of different economic or contractual options to obtaining solar energy, but PPAs is one of them. And you enter it into a PPA with a third party, and then that moves forward a project and realizes some cost savings on the city side as well. So supporting so power purchase agreements for solar energy procurement, and then planning, designing, and building solar arrays with battery storage of sufficient generating capacity to power the municipal buildings. So you have a mix of on-site solar, and you may have a mix of off-site solar. There's, speaking of PPAs, there's virtual PPAs, so you can own or operate or get the renewable energy credits from a solar facility that's not located within the boundary. Ideally it's as close or to the boundary as possible. But the point is that there's a variety of different ways to procure electricity, whether it's on-site generation or through contractual partnership means. From a vehicle fleet standpoint, you have to develop a fleet electrification plan. You have to understand, all right, well, what you have within your fleet, what is the needs of the fleet, what's going to be the use cases for all of those fleet vehicles? Are they going to be, is it a sedan that's used on a regular basis? Is it a heavy truck? Is it a heavy piece of equipment? What is the timeline for electrification, taking into account model availability and things of that nature? And then understanding what charging needs are tied to that. So full electric fleet electrification if possible, developing a plan to support that. And then working with the school department to electrify the school bus fleet. As mentioned, the GHG emissions inventory, a lot of that Scope 1 was tied to the school bus fleet and school buildings. Incorporate carbon emissions and the cost of carbon as an evaluation criteria in the city's capital planning process. So, you're going to be continuing your business, operating and conducting your, administration of management of the city, right? And you have your existing processes. Well, how can you make those processes a little bit more climate friendly? Well, when you're going through standard processes like the capital improvement program, just making sure that you're doing some checks. Does this project support the climate action plan? Does it, detract from the climate action plan? What is the cost of carbon if you're going to proceed with the particular project? And if you were to offset that with carbon offsets, what would that cost? Community activities under the built environment, incentivizing energy efficiency retrofits of existing buildings. So this is going to be the most complex, the most difficult thing to do. You have a ton of buildings that are already existing. Many of them are historic. How can you get existing buildings to retrofit their building systems, become and support being, climate friendly or even net zero? So looking at the land use ordinances, removing any barriers, talking, historic preservation again is a key piece there. But building incentives, and Steve talked about the carrot and the stick. Incentivizing is that carrot. What can you do from a land use ordinance or zoning ordinance standpoint to promote those retrofits? Implementing and enforcing building energy performance standards. So this is kind of a mix of the carrot and the stick here, but requiring buildings of a certain size to report their energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions to the city for purposes of enforcement and benchmarking. So you want to understand from the community's perspective how much energy is being consumed in the buildings and your large generators of emissions. And this is one way of doing it. The city of Boston has done it. The city of Cambridge has done it, and many other cities have also participated in, building energy performance standards and reporting. Adopting an advanced energy code. So for new buildings, making sure that new buildings are meeting, the latest energy standards with incentives to be net zero. So as part of this, make sure that we're including solar and EV capable requirements, and as well as installation requirements. And then once adopted, make sure that support is put into place that enables the city to enforce compliance, because that's a prevalent issue, not just enforcement but elsewhere. Coordinate with appropriate stakeholders, including the developers of prominent commercial properties within the city, to establish a 2030 district. So if you're curious, you can go to the website that's listed here and on the sheet, but 2030 district is, it sets certain goals for the built environment. You gather a group of individual developers or property owners. You could have a neighborhood be a 2030 district. You could have the entire city be a 2030 district. But it sets goals for and parameters for existing and new developments within a certain area. Adopt tax incentives, give preferential rates for multifamily and commercial buildings that are both highly efficient and fossil fuel free. But then investigate a tax structure that gradually increases taxation on carbon intensive activities. And I think there's a few folks in the room that are particularly interested in that one. But from a tax perspective, again, the carrot and the stick, give preferential rates to people that are, more efficient, and, tax a little bit higher those that are, carbon intense. And those revenues can go to either offset the preferential rates, or you can use those tax revenues, those additional tax revenues, the delta, to fund some of the mitigation measures. From an energy perspective, amend zoning and other city policies to eliminate existing barriers to solar development. I talked a little bit about this, but for example, considering a policy that allows more visible PV solar arrays in a historic district. So there's always been a little bit of a battle between sustainability, climate action, and historic preservation, right? No solar panels on the roofs of historic buildings, nothing that's visible or otherwise going to be visibly detracting from the historical significance of that building. But there's ways of balancing that out. So take a look at that. Take a look at what policies could be enacted. There's case studies and there's guidance that's out there for that, specifically for that purpose. Promoting renewable energy development through regulatory incentives. Again, your zoning has dimensional requirements, but density bonuses is a tool that's been commonly used for a variety of different purposes. It can be used here in this case to promote renewable energy development. Permitting and inspection processes are also something that could serve as a barrier. So trying to lower permitting fees and also, making sure the inspection processes are, expedient is another opportunity here. Continue to participate and educate residents about the community power. We have boards and postcards that you can take from this meeting today. But community power gives you an option at a preferential rate because you're pooling a lot of different resources here for your energy supply. But it does give a variety of different options that include various scales of renewable energy. Clean 100 is the 100% renewable content. Setting up a target and making that target known within the community could be helpful to getting those numbers up. I know my community has set a target for their community power program, and they keep track of it, and they advocate for more and more until they reach their ultimate goal of getting a certain percentage of the population enrolled in that particular option. Increase opportunities for passenger rail and other forms of public transportation. So fixed route. Passenger rail, could be a far-fetched dream, but it was part of some previous planning efforts. So we thought it might be good here, but provide your comment if you think that's too far-fetched. But I think one of the primary motivations of this particular activity, or this action rather, is to just expand public transportation, whether it's a fixed route bus service or it's a microtransit service. Just making sure that transit is available to a wider array of people in ways that are going to be beneficial to their daily activities. So meeting them where they need. Advocating for a state-level residential sector rebate for the purchase or lease of new or used electric vehicles. So New Hampshire is one of the only states that doesn't have such an incentive. So advocating on behalf of the residents of the city of Portsmouth is one of those is something that the city can do on behalf of the community at the state level. There are some incentives here and there, but not one that's directly provided by the state, as far as I'm aware. Raise residential and commercial densities in areas that are reasonable walking distance and biking distance to public transit stops. And identify further opportunities for mixed-use developments. So again, bringing people together in more denser, ways that are tied directly to transit and other transportation options so that they can get around. Again, for the built environment, implement measures to reduce embodied carbon emissions in new construction. So this is going to be something that's applicable to both the community and to the municipality, as is everything that's on this slide. So embodied carbon emissions, we put that as a high impact. It's not included in the inventories themselves, but there is so many emissions that are generated outside of the operational context of a building. So making sure that we would be remiss if we didn't mention embodied carbon, and the city would be remiss if it didn't try to enact ways to reduce embodied carbon as part of its construction, as part of construction within the city. Actively promote offshore wind interconnection through the river into existing electric infrastructure to improve the renewable energy mix in the regional grid. So there's a lot of offshore wind development that's occurring on the East Coast. There's some wind developments that have gone up and are under operation alongside Rhode Island, and then that's creeping up towards New Hampshire. And as far as I'm aware, there's a few leases that are going to be available, offshore leases that the federal government is going to release and solicit bids on within the next couple of years. And those projects, just making sure that there's going to be some advocacy on the city side, and that's what the city really can do in this area is just play an advocate to make sure that these projects get completed in a way that is beneficial to the communities. Speaking of advocacy, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, you've met the 2025 commitment, but it's fairly low. It's in the teens, and it hasn't been updated. So, advocating at the state level to increase that RPS so that the grid is greener and that those Scope 2 emissions go down because of external factors. And that's the cheapest thing that could happen, right, on the city's part, is that if the state and other entities and the utilities If they're forced to improve their renewable energy content within the supply that they're providing to you as a community and as a municipality, that can make a significant impact without the expenditure of any municipal funds. Invest in community-scale energy and storage projects. Just make sure that the city is considering having commercial-scale renewable energy distributed generation facility, ready for when certain grant funds become available. So this one is really just taking a look at, okay, well, what can we do for community-scale energy and storage projects? Advocate for the clean heat standard in New Hampshire, similar to Massachusetts, and Vermont just passed this as well. But the clean heat standard generally requires heating energy suppliers to replace their fossil fuels with renewable or heating fuels that are clean over time. And that could be replacing natural gas with renewable natural gas, for example. Evaluating feasibility of forming a municipal utility or joining a cooperative utility and becoming a utility-scale renewable energy generator. So this is something that would be probably very complex to do, but you have a lot of control when you're a municipal utility or when you're joining a cooperative utility. So that's another opportunity there. So with that said, there are many more activities or actions rather that are on the worksheets that Steve is going to be handing out. So we want your feedback on what I just presented and the multitude of actions that are otherwise presented on these sheets. So, Steve?
Can you go to the next slide?
Yep.
All right. When Bert walked in, he said, "Are we going to have fun tonight?" And I said, "Yeah." So, this is hard work, but enjoy this as well. Enjoy the conversation. What we're going to do, we're going to break you out. We were going to give you 55 minutes. I'm going to challenge you to 45 minutes. I'd like to get you all out of here by 8 o'clock. So 45 minutes. I'm going to assign a primary topic to each table because to have you go through all 5 would be way too much. Right? So when I assign the topics, if you do not like that topic, you can leave that table. Or, for instance, if I did not give Bill transportation, he would go find transportation. So I'm going to give it to him anyway. So if you can have somebody The first land management related strategy was the sequestration strategies. The second was municipal purchasing and capital planning with a note about the social cost of carbon. And the third was community conversations, ongoing community conversations. But anyone from that table want to add any additional context? Yeah, go for it. I'll bring the microphone to you.
I think we had the easiest job of any group because it was only about 1.5 pages. So we kind of lumped together the first two into a single sequestration kind of strategy. There's one focused on coastal resource conservation. The subsequent one focused more on reforestation, forest management, and wetland restoration. And so we kind of like bundled those together being a top strategy. And I think for the second one, we were thinking like there's a lot of power in how the city buys and its capital planning process. So making sure that that process has carbon as a key metric, or even a way of costing that into the projects themselves, to tip the projects in favor of things that are going to be sustainable and lasting for us in the long run. And then the last thing was just like, I think, an appreciation for these conversations and hoping that they continue and there's ongoing engagement with community throughout this process.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to transportation. Sorry, I'm going to be like hovering behind you. All right, so the first of three, expand public transit, microtransit plan. And pilot. Thanks, Bill. Partner with businesses, new shuttle loop, prioritize walking, biking, update the plan, prioritize projects. The second, electrify, EVs, the city fleet, school buses, encourage, expand charging infrastructure. And then incentives, incentives for developers as well. Regulations and incentives. And then the third one, regulatory and incentives for developers to reduce car trip through parking maximums and demand management and public transit benefits. So you really packed a lot into three.
We had the 3 detailed pages, so we went thematic.
Okay, I love it. And let's make sure if you have notes you're willing to leave behind that we get those from each of your groups too. Anything that I'm missing from my botching your top three?
Parking maximums, is that just, what is parking maximums?
Instead of, it's telling a developer they need to limit the amount of parking they can provide, but instead of just stopping there to combine that, if they would like to limit the parking they have, then there are other things they have to do, like reduce the trips of their employees, provide tax deductible passes for employees to use public transit, or places to park your bike or bike sharing.
Thank you.
All right, so headed over to solid waste. So the top three for solid waste: number one, expand curbside food waste collection services, education and support for home composting. Number two, assess effectiveness of recycling program, public education related to waste reduction. And number three, reconsider regional anaerobic digester. So anything from the waste group that you want to add?
Okay. Yeah, so the sort of just three themes that we kind of noticed in the suggestions. I mean, the first one obviously being reducing food waste and sort of developing a composting, industrial composting program, going with that way. Once you get that out of the equation, then you can concentrate on like reducing landfill waste and diversion. And then obviously then the next theme that we've noticed was like just assessing like the digester, just assessing your options at that point in your own recycling system and what the possibilities would be for that digester. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going way over here to energy. Wait, there are only two? No, there's a third. Okay. So, all right, so the first one, build solar fields for Portsmouth. The second, have the HDC support future generations, change rules for solar and energy minimalization. And the third, protect Schiller with zoning. Anything you want to add?
I think I just want to explain the Schiller part. Schiller is or was previously a coal or wood-burning energy generator for Eversource. It's had multiple iterations, and I think right now I don't think it's generating anything. However, its main value right now is that it is provides a direct connection to the electricity grid. And when offshore wind comes in from offshore Maine to New Hampshire, they're going to look for connections to the energy grid. And we need to make sure that Schiller does not get sold to some entity that may not allow that usage, or that usage is allowed under our current zoning laws. I'm not sure that it is, so that needs to be looked at, because that could be potentially very important for Portsmouth and all the businesses around Portsmouth that might benefit from offshore wind.
I don't know that the HDC comment was worded as well as it might be, but the point is that we feel that the whole set of regulations and rules of the HDC need to be re-examined in light of where we are relative to climate change.
That's clear. Thank you. All right, the last group, built environment. Replace municipal building systems with electric alternatives. Municipal construction, net zero ready, lead. The third one, educate the community and link resources to improve energy efficiency. And then I told them they could do a fourth one because I was trying to get them to finish up. So they took me up on it. Building energy performance, report energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions. Any additional context from this super group over here? Just because they have more people, not because they're more super than you.
On the last one, the idea process behind it was a bit on being able to track. You can't improve what you can't track. And so starting to track it and share that information back with the city to be able to make educated decisions on it. And then also, as more people can see that updating their systems because it's been tracked, it inspires others to do it as well.
I'll take it. Thank you. Okay. Anything else? Any questions you have for the groups?
No, it was great.
Do I hand this back to you? I know Wes wants to say something. I haven't forgotten, Wes.
Is this the big critical thing that's missing? Because I want to hear about that.
It could be.
Is it critical? Yeah, it's critical.
Do you want me to give him the mic?
Thank you. What's happening here is wonderful. The energy in this room is wonderful. This whole climate action plan is wonderful, and it's insufficient to keep us below 2 degrees centigrade. To stay below 2 degrees centigrade, a price on carbon is critical. It is the most powerful tool in our toolbox to make an impact on our emissions and the growing increase in the temperature, and we're not using it. And the only way we're going to use it is by raising our voices and speaking to members of Congress again and again and again and again. And the simplest way to do that is to go to the CCL website and jump into the Take Action. There are communication vehicles set up there. You can do it by email. You can get more involved and do it in person. But the whole matter of pricing carbon is just critical. Thank you.
That was really short. Thank you. Yes.
Get to the point.
I just wanted to, and this is not directly related to what we're doing here because we're talking really about electricity. But I want to point out that electricity is about 1/3 of the energy use in total. If you consider transportation, heating, and various other applications, steel making, these are the other 70% of the energy economy are the so-called hard-to-decarbonize sectors. Aircrafts, heavy-duty trucks, electric batteries and electricity will not do the trick. So I just want to point out that there are lots of stuff going on in the rest of the world around hydrogen and green hydrogen and green ammonia, meaning hydrogen and ammonia generated by green sources like solar and wind. And ammonia is a liquid fuel. Hydrogen is a gas fuel. It could replace heating. It could release electric fuel cell cars, which are running in California already. And in many places in the world, lots of vehicles and lots of applications for ammonia is also already happening. So we're focusing right now on electricity here, and that's okay. We got to start somewhere. I just want to point out there are other things out there that we'll need to address if we're going to deal with the climate change issue.
All right. I think it's back to you now.
Okay, great. I was just busy typing down those notes. Good comments. All right, so we're going to close the meeting, but just a quick note on the next steps. The climate ambassadors, climate future ambassadors, I heard a question about whether or not they were still active. They are still active, and they're still, getting into the community and providing us some feedback. On the sign-in sheet, there's an opportunity to mark your name off if you do want to become a climate ambassador. There's still some work to do. But they're going to be continuing their work. We're going to be refining and QA/QCing the 2021 inventory and then taking the 2018 and forecasting that out. The reason why we're not using the 2021 inventory is because it's a COVID year inventory. So we're using the pre-COVID year inventory to forecast the emissions out to target years. Strategy prioritization and assessment. As Steve mentioned, those actions are going out to the larger community via that software platform available via online, and we'll be taking all of that information, again, to giving the public some time to respond, but then we as consultants are looking over everything and doing a detailed, more refined assessment against certain criteria to evaluate the strategies against each other to ultimately come up with a list of 40 or so actions that we're going to be including in the climate action plan, and then putting the rest of them to the side, perhaps in the plan itself, and saying these are supplemental things that you could do if you find an extra pot of money, or you have an extra staff capacity, or if there's extra volunteers within the community. But we want to refine that list of things that the city and the community can do. So about 40 actions are going to be prioritized, and we're going to look at criteria like cost and greenhouse gas emissions benefit, the co-beneficial aspect of some of these as well. And then setting greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So we heard a little bit about this during the first community workshop. I think we overwhelmingly heard that they want the city itself, the municipality, to be net zero, and that perhaps science-based targets or some level of reduction at the community level. And I think a lot of folks did want to see the community to go to net zero, but then after some subsequent engagements, they want really the city to lead. That's not to say that the community can't lead as well within its larger region, but if you have comments on that, let us know. But really tying the strategies that we've prioritized and their greenhouse gas emissions potential to how far the city can get and when they can get there. And then the development of the implementation timelines and the funding plans. So when are you going to implement these various actions, and how are you going to pay for them? That's in the roadmap as well. Now we're looking at the next community meeting to occur sometime in the fall. We're preparing the full draft climate action plan at that time for you to respond to, and then we're hoping to get a full draft by the end of the year, and then a celebratory meeting either probably due to the holidays in January or early in 2024 to get everybody excited about the plan, get them motivated to help the implementation aspects of it. So we're looking forward to that. So that's really the next steps. And thank you. And Peter, do you have any final comments?